Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf is the last Daf in Parak Lulav Arava, the fourth Parak of the Masechta. From the beginning of the Daf until the end of the Parak discusses the water that was brought for Nesach HaMayim to be poured on the Mizbeach on Friday in order to use on Shabbos. First of all, the Gemara refers to the fact that it had to be put in a Kli which didn't have Kedusha. The Gemara wants to know why not. The Gemara has a few suggestions to have avoided the problem, and the Gemara explains why we couldn't use either of those suggestions. Then the Gemara refers to the fact that it had to be covered, and if it was uncovered, then you couldn't use it. The Gemara wants to know why is that true. There's a couple of suggestions to get out of that problem as well. Then we get to the next Parak, Parak HaChalil, the fifth Parak of Maseches Sukkah. And here, the Gemara discusses Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, how it was performed, the playing of musical instruments, whether you could do it on Shabbos, how musical instruments were made, what they were made out of, centering around the major machlokas as to whether the playing of musical instruments was considered part of the avoda of the Beis HaMikdash or not. So first of all, let's begin the daf. We've seen in our last Mishnah that the water which was brought on Friday to be used on Shabbos had to be put in a kli which was not kli shari, so it cannot be in a kli that had kedusha. Now the Gemara understands the reason for that is because any object which is put in a kli shari gets kedusha, it becomes neskadesh. As soon as it gets kedusha, it has to be used that day. If it's left overnight with kedusha on it, it becomes puzzle. It's called lina, a psul of lina. The Gemara, though, has two suggestions to get out of the problem. First of all, we should just have, we could put the water in the kli without having in mind that it has kedusha. If we don't want it to be niskadesh, it won't be niskadesh. Suggestion number one. Suggestion number two is let's take more water than we need. The Rabbanan hold we only need 3 lugin of water. So let's put in 4 lugin of water. The halacha is that a kli shari is only miskadesh if it has the proper amount. If it has too much, it's called einei roi l'kli. It's not mikadesh. So why don't we just do those two things? So why do we have to put it in a kli which is not miskadesh? So Gemara has 3 suggestions here. Zeiri says that this Tana does not hold of either of 2 solutions. This Tana holds neither of them will work. First of all, he holds that a kli shari is mekadesh what's in it, even without intent, even if you don't have intent for it to have kedusha. Second of all, as far as your second suggestion, he holds that there is no upper limit to how much water could be used for the Nesach HaMayim. It is a minimum of 3 lugin, but you definitely have to put in 3 lugin. You can't put in less, and there's no maximum. So no matter how much you put, it is a proper amount, and therefore you will not get out of the kli being mekadesh by saying it's the wrong amount. There is no wrong amount. That's the Iri's suggestion. The Gemara gives a second answer. This is Chizkiah. Chizkiah says is that you could even say that this Mishnah holds that you have to have intent for it to be niskadesh in order for it to have kedusha. Why don't we just say we'll put it in a kli shari and not have in mind for it to be niskadesh? We have exera. People will think that you did have in mind for it to be niskadesh. That's what it appears, and they'll see you using it the next day. They'll learn a wrong halacha that lina is not a psul. And the Gemara's last answer is Rav Yanai, name of Rabbi Zera, who says that neither of these suggestions are going to work because somebody who's watching will assume that this is the water that was set aside for the Kohen Gadol to wash his hands on Yom Kippur, which was just a couple of days earlier. And I'll think that this is therefore water which was from who knows how long ago, and there none of your solutions will help because it was put there for Kedusha for the right reason. There's no maximum amount, and he's going to get confused, and he's going to assume that a psul of lina is not a problem. Okay. Next topic, the Gemara says, we said that if it becomes uncovered, you can't use the water. So the Gemara says, why not? The only problem with things that are uncovered is we're afraid that a snake drank from it and dropped some of his venom into the water. So great, so let's filter it out. We have a statement of Rav Nechemia who says that a filter catches venom. And if you have a filter sitting on a barrel with another kli on top of it, so the top kli you can't use because it could have venom in it, but the bottom kli you could, it's got a filter on top of it. So let's filter it out. What's the problem? So the Gemara says, maybe Rav Nechemia doesn't agree with this Mishnah. Maybe this Mishnah doesn't go like Rav Nechemia. Gemara says, no, Rav Nechemia would still say that you can't use it for Nesach HaMayim. You could use it, Rav Nechemia was saying you could drink from it. He wasn't saying that you could use it for Nesach HaMayim. That's already not covered. To use something which you're going to fix, something which is low quality, which it needs to be fixed, that's not the right thing to do. This ends Parak Lulav Arava. Now we begin Parak HaChalil. It refers to something we had seen in the last Parak, a Mishnah there, that said that Chalil, which is the music that was played, could be 5 days or 6 days. The Gemara says this refers to the music of Simchas Beis HaShe'eva, the drawing of water, and it's not something you can do not on Shabbos and not on Yontif. And therefore, if Shabbos falls on Yontif, so then you have 6 days that you could do it, and that's why it could happen 6 days. If Shabbos and Yontif are separate days, then 2 out of the 7 days of Sukkot are knocked out, and you only have 5 days left, and that's why this is sometimes 6 days and sometimes 5 days. Now, the Gemara begins, and the Gemara has different names to what this was called. Rav Yehuda and Rav Eina. One said it was called Shoyeva, one said it was called Chashuva. Gemara says there's a source for both of them. One is because we say this is referred to as ushafta mayim b'sasa. You should draw water with simcha. So that's referring to as she'iva. And the other is a Mishnah that refers to it as mitzvah chashuvihi uba misheishis mibereshis. It's a very chashuv mitzvah that goes back to the 7 days of Bereshis. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to discuss that the playing of music in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the Gemara first brings a brisa, which has a very wide machlekes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim about playing music on Shabbos and Yom Tov in the Beis Hamikdash. Rabbi Yossi by Rabbi Yehuda says that you can play it even on Shabbos, and the Chachamim say you can't play it not on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says this machlekes is not about our music of the Simchas Beis She'iva. That everybody agrees you're not allowed to play on Shabbos or on Yom Tov because it's not an avoda. It's just something you do for simcha. It's something that goes along with an avoda, but it's not an avoda itself, and therefore it definitely is not doche Shabbos or Yom Tov. The machlokas is about the music that was played when they put wine on the mizbeach together with karbonos. And the machlokas is that wine count as avoda or not? Now the singing of the Leviim along with the wine, that's definitely part of the avoda. It's a necessary required part of the avoda. The question is, the musical instruments, is that the main part of the singing, or is the voice the main part of the singing? If the voice is the main part of the singing and the music is just an accompaniment, then it's not necessary and therefore it can't be doche Shabbos or Yom Tov. If, however, the main part of the singing, the main part of the shira is the music, the musical instruments, then it is a necessary avoda, and avoda is doche Shabbos, just like all the avodas of the Karbonet Tamid are doche Shabbos. Now, the Gemara wants to show that this machlokas as to whether the musical instruments is the main part of the shira, whether that's considered shira or not, that is at the center of another machlokas, and the Gemara is going to show that there's two other ways to explain that machlokas, which does not show that this idea, this question of whether the musical instruments were essential avoda, whether that's the machlokas or not. What machlokas are we referring to? Machlokas between Rebbe and Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda as to whether you're allowed to make a klisharis out of wood. Rebbe says he can't make klisharis out of wood. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda says he could. Says the Gemara, what's this machlokas about? So the Gemara is going to say in all three explanations, the machlokas is whether the flute that Moshe Rabbeinu had in the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a flute. A flute was made out of reeds, which counts as wood. The question is, can we learn from there that you could make a klishares out of wood, because he had this flute that was made out of wood. So Gemara first wants to say the machlokas is, was Moshe's flute considered klishares or not? And that depends on, are the musical instruments considered klishares or not? And that depends on, is the avoda, is the musical instrument considered part of the avoda? Is the main shira, the musical instrument playing, and therefore it has to be done along with the carbon, and therefore it's avoda? Or do we say no, the main shira is the singing, and therefore the musical instruments are not the main shira, and therefore they're not klisharis? So, according to Rebbe, they are not klisharis, and therefore Moshe's flute is not klisharis, and you can't learn from there that you're allowed to make musical instruments out of wood. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that is a klishares, and therefore you could learn from there that you could make musical instruments out of wood. The Gemara says no, there's a whole other explanation of this. Could be that everybody really holds that they are klishares. The machlokas is whether you could learn from there because there was no other way to make a functional flute, and the question is, could you learn what's called efsher mi'i efsher? Could you learn something where you have an alternative from a case where there's no alternative? Moshe Rabbeinu's flute had to be made from wood, because as the Gemara explains, as Rashi explains, they tried making a flute out of metal and it didn't work. It didn't have the same sound. So they had to go back to flute. But that doesn't mean that you could learn out of there that you can make a bowl or a fork or any other thing where you could make it out of metal. It doesn't show you that you're allowed to make it out of wood. That's the machlokas. Do we say that you could learn from there? After all, they did make it out of wood, so you see it's okay. Or do we say, no, they only were allowed to make that out of wood because they were stuck. There's no other option. But something that you can make out of metal, you have to. Now the Gemara has a third explanation. And this explanation is that it's a question of how you understand psukim when you have a klal prat klal. That is, you have three phrases discussing something. First one is general, the middle one is specific, and the third one is general. How do you understand that? Do we call it klal prat klal, or do we call it riboy miyad riboy? If it's klal prat klal, then we view it as follows. The second phrase, which is specific, limits the generalization and says you can only use what's in the specific. And then the third phrase, which is general, adds one tiny thing. So you go one step past the general. Or do you see the other way, that it's a riboy miyad riboy? The Torah first is marb a lot of things, then it's memayed it a little bit, and then it's marbid back more. That means that the only thing that you only take away one tiny thing, but anything that's similar to the miyud in some way is included. Now, this is centering around the menorah. The menorah, the Torah describes with a general phrase, a specific phrase, and a general phrase. What is it? It says vasisa menorah without saying out of what, and that's general. Then it says Zahav Tahar, that's specific, and then it says Miksha Te'asa HaManayra, that it should be hammered, but it doesn't say from what. So again, you have a general, specific, general. The specific is gold. So if you say that you only include one extra thing, so then the only thing I can include is other metals. I can't include anything else, and therefore you can't make it out of wood. If you include everything except for one thing, then the only thing I will exclude is earthenware. I can't make the menorah out of cheres, but you could make it out of wood. So that's the question. How do you interpret that? How do you understand this type of phrase? And therefore, the question is, could you make the menorah out of wood or not? Because is it included or excluded? And that is the basis of this one.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.